What's up, you guys? Sean Ross at managing editor, FightfulMMA.com. We had a loaded weekend of MMA, Bellator, UFC, and this weekend, a loaded combat sports weekend. Well, kinda. Bellator MMA Europe 2, UFC Fight Night Ottowa, and of course, Canelo versus Jacobs. Next week, we have the debut of PFL Season 2. They actually just signed another WWE name, Lillian Garcia, to ring announce. But we got some stuff to talk about, and we're going to talk about it with one James Lynch. James, how are you?
I'm awesome, guys. Like you mentioned, busy weekend and busy week ahead. We got a lot to talk about today.
Yeah. We are also joined by Showdown Joseph Ferraro.
What's up, guys? How are you? Sorry to everyone that's kind of tuned in right now. I'm fighting a cold, so if I start hacking, I apologize.
Hot dog. You got the probably from that plane you were on.
Could have been the plane, the weather changing over here. It could be anything. Yeah, but yeah, I would hazard to guess when you're 13 hours on a plane within 4 days or 3 days, yeah, you get sick.
We mainly, right now, to recap things, there hasn't been like a ton of news that has emerged out of the last couple of days or anything like that. But we had some shows this past weekend. UFC Fight Night Fort Lauderdale, Bellator 220. Some momentous fights. Not necessarily great fights in some regards, but there was good with the bad. Let's start off with Bellator. Now, I got to say I was shocked. Like, I always tout how many comments are in our live coverage and all that. How about 660-ish to 0 UFC shut out Bellator? I wasn't expecting that this weekend. Wow. I expected Bellator to be much more talked about this weekend. But I think for a lot of the wrong reasons, Bellator got talked about this week, Joe. But I want to know what you thought of this event. We saw MacDonald versus Fitch go to a majority draw. We're going to talk about that. Elimele McFarland defeated Ortega. Ben Henderson versus Piccolotti. Davis over McGeary. Just chat some shit, Joe.
Well, I mean, I was able to catch some of the highlights for these fights here. I mean, through a name value, this main card did have quality fights, quality names on there, especially with the co-main event with the flyweight title fight. Obviously, Rory MacDonald has that UFC backing. Old school fans know who John Fitch is, and there's always that tie with John Fitch taking on George St. Pierre and the rivalry with TriStar. I mean, Ben Henderson, former UFC champ, Phil Davis. I mean, there was name value on this card. I'm actually surprised there wasn't much love for it.
Also, shout out to James Lynch for letting me know that I put our Google Hangouts link live. we almost had a bunch of people joining. That happened to me once on a Monday Night Raw episode. I accidentally tweeted the Google Hangouts link that I sent to Joe and James, and we had just people like you just saw them laid back, dark in dark rooms and stuff. That was almost tragic. James, I want to know what you think of this John Fitch, Rory MacDonald fight, because, man, I'm real conflicted on this. I see it. The majority draw, who win. Here's what happened. Majority draw was the ruling. 2 scorecards had a draw, 1 had Fitch. It is wild to me that Rory MacDonald can advance in this tournament without having won on a scorecard, but John Fitch did win on 1. Now, I understand this is literally the most confusing thing that could have possibly happened, and it happened, James.
Yeah, worst case scenario for Bellator here. And of course, Rory's speech after, we can get into that in a sec. But yeah, to me, the guy who had the scorecard that a judge picked that he won should have advanced. That doesn't make any sense. And I think in general, if you watch that fight, I know some people will say Rory won that. I thought John Fitch clearly won the fight. You know, I think I know Bellator, their cash cow is Rory. It's not the 41-year-old who's, you know, just been with Bellator a little long, you know, just a little while there. But yeah, this was really bad. And I think, you know, they can't just sweep this under the rug. People got to be, you know, should make Bellator accountable for this. I realize Rory is their champion, and I know there's obviously, you know, especially when it comes to like decisions and things like that, you know, you got to beat the champ, as they say. But I think this was a case where, like you said, the judge did give it to John Fitch. I think Fitch gets screwed out of this whole thing, and hopefully they look at this again. I think the solution here would be remove Rory from the tournament and have the winner potentially fight him later if you wanted to get around that ruling and you still wanted Rory to be involved. But yeah, this is really bad, and I do feel for John Fitch, and I hope they can somehow compensate compensate him or whatever. But yeah, it's just this was a really, to me, this was the story of the weekend, was Rory MacDonald and everything that he said after and the fight itself. It seems like the old Rory is gone.
Yeah, the fight sucked, in my opinion. It was really bad, but I thought John Fitch won that fight. I really did. And I couldn't believe that there were so many scorecards for Rory. I was shocked. And, oh, man, Joe, you've been through a lot of the courses. You've been through a lot of this stuff, but this is a situation you can't really prepare for because it's not like somebody has to advance in the tournament. But no matter what, how is it affected with championship fights? Because, of course, Bellator could have said, well, the guy who wins on one scorecard advances in the tournament, and that's up to them. They make that call based on bookings. But how does all that play into championships? Because the title can't change hands on majority draw, which was a big part of this.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, I have to watch the fight again or in full, to be honest with you, to dissect what my scorecards were. But based on what James said, and I completely agree, one judge, so two judges had it 47-47, one judge had it 48-46. Fitch should be the one advancing. I mean, I said it last week and knew. I mean, I predicted and knew. And I wasn't being facetious only because Rory MacDonald is not the same Rory MacDonald as the guy that was competing in the UFC. He's just completely his game has gone downhill. Because do we want to go back to that Robbie Lawler fight? I mean, that took his life out of him, man. And it's been a different fighter altogether, especially with that fight with Gegard Mousasi. He's a completely different athlete. He's not the same. He will beg to differ. Faraz will beg to differ. George will tell me otherwise. Listen, the proof is in the pudding here. And when it comes to situations like this, it's tough for John Fitch to sit there and be like, wait a second. Of all the judges' scorecards, I'm the only one that got a victorious scorecard. Why am I not advancing? Why am I not the champ? Well, you're not the champ because of a majority draw. I get that. But in my opinion, John Fitch should be advancing here. At the very worst, and not the very worst, another solution here is a simple rematch, right?
Oh, could you imagine, though?
But just for the sake of defining an answer, right?
Oh, I get it. I agree with you. And let's be honest, Bellator isn't beyond doing that. They rematched Liam McGeary and Phil Davis on this same show, and that fight did not need to happen. Joe, I want to know, in your estimation, and you're well-educated in judging and refereeing and all that, should there be a shift? If there's a majority draw, should it be the person who wins the most scorecards gets the victory in that case? Or should they leave it as is where, well, two scorecards say draw, one says a person won? How would you handle that?
For the sake of argument and under the unified rules of mixed martial arts, it stays a majority draw. Definitely stays a majority draw because two of the three scorecards making it a majority, 66%, make it a draw. And that's why it's a majority draw. So for the record, it should remain a majority draw. For the purposes of the tournament, where the promoter has a show and has a system going forward to crown a new champion or tournament champion, I would look at the promoter and say, well, if you want to look at it this way, if it's a draw and you got to beat the champ, that's a fallacy. To beat the champ, you got to beat the champ. No, that doesn't work. You got to defeat the champ in every single round. No, you got to defeat the champ on the scorecards. But for the sake of the promotion to continue their tournament, John Fitch, in my opinion, is the one that needs to move forward because he had at least one winning scorecard.
Let's talk about what happened afterwards. James, you mentioned it. Rory MacDonald, I think he blamed his shitty fight on Jesus at one point, which I'm on board with, because how many times have we seen people almost murder one another in the cage and they credit Jesus for that? Rory was like, man, you know what? I used to like to fight, but Jesus tells me not to anymore. More or less, I'm paraphrasing. But he says that he doesn't have that same urge for violence anymore. Keep in mind, he's about 6 weeks out from a fight with Neiman Gracie, which I don't think is going to happen as scheduled, James. What do you think about all this?
Well, he said in the post-fight presser that he is still planning on fighting Neiman Gracie, and Faraz was on with Ariel yesterday and says that that's the plan. But yeah, again, I think when you hear a fighter talk like this, I don't think it's the best idea to have him in there. I mean, if you know what it reminds me of a little bit, it's like in the NHL. Joe can you can understand this reference. Like when a team's had a 6-game road trip and they come home back to back. and then they're not going to play well the next night. It kind of reminds me of that. It's like, as advertised, it's not going to be a good thing. Like Rory's basically saying, like, I'm not the same fighter, I don't have the same killer instinct. Like, if you imagine, you could not sell that fight any less, in terms of the next matchup with Neiman Gracie. And I think I think Bellator really needs to evaluate this matchup and evaluate if Rory should even be fighting, because that's not a good message to send to your fans. I mean, this was a terrible fight. He wants to, obviously the tournament has to move along, but I think they got to reevaluate this, because again, if you're saying you're not the same fighter, why would people want to go watch that? What can you even expect from Rory this time out? I just think right now, mentally, he's not in it. And, I think that it's something they should reevaluate at this point. I realize he's the champion, but I don't know. I think this is something that they really need to take a closer look at.
Joe, your thoughts on this? I mean, obviously you're close with a lot of people who've been close with Rory over the years.
Doesn't make sense to me, man. Well, you know what? I should say, let me paraphrase that in a different manner, because, Rory has always operated on a different frequency from day one when I met him as a teenager. He's a little bit different. He was a very, very, violent individual in terms of competing in mixed martial arts. I remember I had a saying one time, this guy, walks on a tightrope of dental floss, just hoping he falls into the octagon to fight. Now it's a cage with Bellator. His outlet was the violence. His outlet was competing. His outlet was just to be allowed to be violent for 15 to 25 minutes. And it seems that it's been lost on him right now. And I don't know about the religious thing anymore, or what's really happening with that. But it's a different person nowadays. It's a different person competing altogether. And, like James said, this is not the message you want. Bellator doesn't want this guy saying this kind of stuff when it's like, man, I don't know if he's the cash cow, James. I don't think he's ever been that. And I mean, that's one of the reasons why the UFC was more than happy to not offer him what his management expected that he was going to receive. He was never a guy that wanted to promote fights. I mean, we had conversations in person, one-on-one, man-to-man about, he was talking to me one time about, I want suits like you. I want suits like you. I said, well, I'm on TV every week and my show replays 3 times a week. I'm in the public eye. You need to figure out how to get in the public eye, i.e. come on my show a bit more, do more radio shows, do more interviews, be in that public eye. Don't be taken off people's radars, and sponsors will jump on that. You'll make more money. You can get the suits. I want to be like Mayweather. I want to be like Mayweather. So you want to be like Mayweather. Mayweather doesn't stop. When it's time for Mayweather to promote, it's like, that's all he does, right? You can't expect just fighting to make your millions. You got to do more and get those sponsorship dollars. So it's a guy that's operated like this for quite some time. And, now we're starting to see the later part of his career, and he's still young, which is strange,
That's a very good point. Also, Ilima-Lei Macfarlane defeated Veta Ortega. Ilima-Lei Macfarlane is now 1 title defense away from tying the Bellator record with Ben Askren, James. She's probably going to get it because there's not a lot of stiff competition there, but I think she is what Bellator wants her to be. I'm not going to pretend like this was a best-case scenario for Bellator, but Ilima-Lei Macfarlane winning was a great scenario for Bellator, James.
It is, and this was actually the best-case scenario for this fight because it was closer than people thought, and I think with the way the fight ended, with the the cut and everything else, it sounds like that rematch is going to happen, and that's always what you want in a situation like this because, you want to be invested in the challenger. It reminds me of UFC 165, John Jones, Alexander Gustafsson. You have this super close fight. I mean, that fight essentially made Gustafsson. Had Gustafsson got finished in the first round, I don't think his career would be as long as it has been, despite the injuries and everything. But, I think that's one of those things. They sort of got a gift here in the fact that Ortega made it a bit of a fight. And I think that Bellator is going to run with that. I think we will see the rematch because, like you said, she's running out of challengers and notable challengers, too. I mean, Letourneau was sort of the pinnacle because of the fact she fought for a UFC championship. I don't know what is next after this. I think there's like 1 or 2 fighters out there, but all the good flyweight fighters are in the UFC, and I think it's just going to be like a Ben Askren situation where he just keeps winning, and they're going to have to just find people to take that title spot.
Joe, any thoughts on this one?
She's the darling of the company, if you ask me. I think they're doing great with her, and I think she's doing great for them. So I never thought of the rematch, but yeah, why not, right?
We had 2 fights. Ben Henderson wins, beats Adam Piccolotti. This was a close fight. It was a Ben Henderson fight. And then we had Phil Davis and Liam McGeary, these 2 accomplished ground fighters. And what do? A technical striking battle on the feet. And I say technical as a nice way of saying real boring. These guys went about 0 for 75 on strikes. it was like when you're sparring and you've just learned about concussions and you're sparring right afterwards and you're like, you know what, I really don't want one. Then Phil Davis eventually takes Liam McGeary down, and it looked like Liam McGeary tapped even before the submission was locked in. James, any thoughts on these two? I mean, again, from a Bellator perspective, you're probably happy that Ben Henderson picked up his 3rd win in a row. You're probably happy that Phil Davis, the younger, more marketable, more famous light heavyweight, has won. He told me, by the way, he has no plans on moving up to heavyweight anytime soon. So he's sticking around in that division. Your thoughts, James?
Just on Henderson Piccolotti, very close fight. I actually think this was another good scenario for Bellator where Piccolotti showed that he's still a top guy in that division. And, you know, Benson Henderson winning a split decision. Shocker. We've never seen that before. You know, I think it's one of those things where, you know, Henderson has the bigger name. They can sell that to, you know, whatever happens with Michael Chandler and Pitbull, although, you know, Henderson's, I think, fought both of those guys. There's just more options, though. With Henderson, you can do a lot more just because he is a former UFC champion. And for Piccolotti, like I said, he didn't look terrible in this fight. I thought he actually was quite game and potentially could have won this fight too. With Davis, you know, him finishing a fight is just a miracle. Let's just you know, enjoy that for a second because it's been forever since he finished a fight. So in that sense, and McGeary, I think it's just the game's past him at this point. I mean, really, I think, you know, he's 36. I don't really know what he has to accomplish at this point. He's not going to get back to the top of the heap. You know, maybe he thinks about hanging them up. And I know he recently moved to Hawaii, I think last year, you know, just ride out and find a career after fighting, but I don't think he's a top fighter anymore. And for Davis, he's still in that mix. You know, I'm sure people are dying to see that trilogy against him and Ryan Bader, but no, in all seriousness, he's still up there and he's a decent name. So I think this is a good case scenario for Bellator here.
How about you, Joe?
Sarcasm filter on James's mic is on point today. It's tough not to echo his sentiments. I thought Henderson was going to get that finish. I'll be honest with you. I thought he'd be able to pull something off here. Alas, a split decision was not what I envisioned. I didn't think he was going to lose to Adam, but even a split decision, and you know, James's sarcasm is noted. Come on, Benson, man, you got to figure this out, man. Twilight of your career, we got to do this. Phil Davis not moving up to heavyweight, I think he should consider it, to be honest with you. Why not? But again, the trilogy fight with Ryan Bader I'm sure is what he's angling for. He wants that title back, and I don't, you know, sure, it's going to be difficult because Ryan Bader is absolutely on fire right now, but sometimes styles make fights. I know we've seen it before, but you know, anything can happen. In terms of McGeary going down and tapping pretty much, man, you see a picture of his busted jaw? Yeah, that's I mean, guys are tough, but it's not, that hurts. But yeah, Phil Davis got the finish, you know, good for him.
Speaking of styles makes fights, UFC Fort Lauderdale, Jack Hermansson, a life-changing win over Jacare Souza. I would say dominant, but there was about a round and a half where Jacare really ripped to the body of Hermansson that looked like it was going to do some damage. But Hermansson got it done, Joe. This is, like I said, life-changing. Like, we're talking, he fought a month ago. He came back and he beat Jacare, and we are looking at a middleweight scenario, Joe. Jacare lost. Gastelum lost. Weidman lost. Rockhold hit the bricks. Romero's been gone for who knows what's going on. This is wild. It's exciting. It's different. What did you think of his performance and the picture moving forward?
Well, with great risk comes great reward, right? Took a huge risk. Took this fight on short notice, and we all thought, oh, man, this is going to be tough for you, but you can probably pull it off. Well, he pulled it off with flying colors, in my opinion. He didn't get the finish. You heard in his post-fight interview where he was kind of like, I was aiming for that finish, but he did what he had to do. Now, to say that he's not in the title mix, or at least should be mentioned, would be, you know, asinine, because the guy pulled off a pretty good victory when you consider Jacare. Now, Jacare, I think we can all start agreeing that the twilight is here. You know, he's not that killer anymore, and you know, especially when that fight went down on the ground, it was almost like, you know, if you break down this fight, Hermansson dominated on the ground, right? He nullified, he neutralized, he did a fantastic job. So it's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen with his career. Both guys actually, but you know, I like these kind of stories, man. You know, the Joker comes in there, short notice, does what he has to do, and continues to move up. So I like to see him bypass some of these guys that you just mentioned, Sean, and get up there and get within one fight of a title fight. Why not?
Yeah, I agree. James, this was a big one, a huge one. And a lot of people, when this main event was set as the replacement. They were like, okay, sacrificial lamb, not so much.
You think so? I think it was a little bit closer than people thought, and we saw that in the betting line as well. It wasn't Jacare wasn't a huge favorite in this one. I mean, Hermansson, we got to remember how he won his last fight. He submitted David Branch. I mean,
Yeah.
Turnaround, really. I think that's why a lot of people wrote him off.
That too, and he nearly submitted Jacare in this fight. I mean, there was a point in I think it was the first round where he got him to the ground, and I mean, it's Jacare. You're like, no worries, he'll get it out, and he did. But no, I think I agree. Yeah, the turnaround was a lot, but we've seen that before. I mean, there's guys like Anthony Smith as well at 205, where he's just getting fights and he's riding that momentum. You're seeing opportunities like that for guys. I mean, even like I mean, to me, there's. It like Joe said, high risk, high reward here. I think this was just the test to see, is he really that good, or is it just a case of him getting someone at a good time? And clearly he is that good. He's definitely in the mix right now, and I think it's a very exciting time in the middleweight division, because just think in the span of not even 5 months, you're seeing all these pieces move around, and I think Hermansson has a lot of options here for his next opponent. I know he wants that card. I think it was later in the year, internationally, but if he wants to fight Yoel Romero, I would imagine that's got to be a little bit sooner, because Romero, as far as I know, he's pretty good to go quite soon. It was just an illness that kept him out. I think that's the fight you got to do right now. Forget about Paulo Costa. He really hasn't. I mean, and to me, he's got to fight some better competition here. Uriah Hall should not get him a fight with Jack or with Yoel Romero, in my opinion. So I do Hermansson against Yoel, or Hermansson versus Gastelum maybe. I mean, I don't know. To me, it's good to be in the Jack Hermansson business.
Greg Hardy defeated Smokliov. Boy, was I wrong about this. I thought that Dimitri's experience would maybe give him an advantage. And Dana White, he said it. Okay, here's the thing. Dana White echoed my sentiments afterwards. He goes, I want to know who the 9 guys this guy beat were. And I'm like, why don't you know? You hired him.
If that wasn't a pot shot to the matchmakers, I don't know what is.
Yeah.
Right?
Greg Hardy won. Yeah. Is there anything worth talking about here? Greg Hardy won. That's nice. He's going to get a can again.
And you got 100. You got 150K for the fight. I don't know if you saw that.
Oh.
But here's the thing. I just want to point this out. Let's take everything, and we talked about this in the previous show. Let's take everything we know about Greg Hardy in his personal life and all that outside of it. I see this narrative over and over. I can't believe they put him in the main event. I don't understand why the UFC is promoting him. I don't understand why he's getting paid this much. He's a former NFL Pro Bowler. If you forget about his past, that is exactly what they should be doing. They should be giving him a can. They should be paying him this amount of money. All that goes into place. Now, morally, is it right? Ethically, is it right? Absolutely not. But I mean, you have to look at it from that. Like, these people who are dumbfounded, they can't understand why they would put him there. And regardless of what you think talent-wise, if it was any other NFL Pro Bowler, you'd be saying the same thing. That's why people tune in. I had Greg Hardy on a fantasy football team years ago. I know who Greg Hardy is, and I'm like a casual football fan. That just goes to show that they know what they're doing. And in some ways it worked to what the UFC was trying to achieve, which is, I'm sure they knew, they know everything. I mean, to say that, they didn't know about his past, or that he's whatever's happened, they know. The fact that they got people talking about it means that they've done their job. So that's how I look at the whole situation. And yeah, they got to keep building him up. They're going to give him the MVP treatment. Trust me.
Mike Perry defeated Alex Oliveira. Dare I say this may have been Mike Perry's biggest win, although, Alex Oliveira has lost 2 in a row now. Alex Oliveira, a very well-rounded fighter, Joe. And Mike Perry beat the man and then asked for a fight with Darren Till. About 6-8 months ago, I didn't like that fight. I like that fight now. I think it makes a lot of sense now, considering their history, if Darren Till can stop stealing vehicles for a little while. That would be helpful. What do you think of Perry, and what do you think of Perry versus Till?
I like Perry versus Till. Why not? Get it done. It's an easy sell for a lot of people, especially the UFC. People will tune in to watch that fight. I wasn't overly impressed with Mike Perry's performance, to be honest with you. He looked lethargic and slow at times, although he was timing his strikes. But he did beat Alex Oliveira, and I think that the fact that Mike Perry's power is what it is what really probably dropped that gas tank on Cowboy, because after he got hit a few times, he was like, whoa, I got to be careful here. He kept engaging. But Mike Perry still has some work to do at 170 pounds to really impress people. But if he can do that, lethargic or slow or not, and defeat Darren Till, a lot of eyebrows are going to be raised. Although Till's been knocked out in his past 2 fights, if I'm not mistaken, or at least his last fight.
He's lost 2 in a row, and that puts him in a much closer
scenario. It was a title shot.
Yeah,
title shot,
and then
Masvidal. So he's been rocked twice. So who knows where his chin and his brain is at right now. So this could be a good opportunity for Mike Perry to capitalize on. So, definitely a fight I want to see happen, because Till's got to do something, right?
James?
First things first, I can't believe Cowboy's fallen off the horse the way he has in these last fights, you know, like Gunnar Nelson and now this. I mean, it's just it's incredible just how much he's fallen off. You know, yeah, anyways. But yeah,
for like to wrangle up a few victories, right?
Yeah, exactly. You know, he's really, yeah. Anyways, as far as this performance, very surprising for Mike Perry, you know, because he was an underdog heading into this one, had his back against the wall. You know, good win for him. The Till fight, I do have some issues with it, and I'll tell you why. I mean, obviously the buildup would be great, and stylistically it's a great fight, but I've said this before, Darren Till has 2 losses. You cannot give him a fight like this where there's a risk of him losing. Give him a tomato can. I don't think Mike Perry's an easy fight for anyone. He's been in pretty much all of his fights. I think with what Till brings to the table in terms of his marketability and just the following, I mean, you know, anytime anything about Darren Till is mentioned, it's huge views on YouTube. Like this guy has a huge following. I think you got to give him a layup in his next fight, and I don't think Mike Perry is that layup. Not to mention, I don't think Perry necessarily deserves this fight because of the fact, you know, he beat Oliveira, which I know he's ranked and everything. Before that, though, you know, he lost to Cowboy Cerrone, and then he beat Paul Felder, who's a lightweight. I just don't know where he fits in. I mean, it was a couple fights ago that Max Griffin completely dominated him and beat him. So I don't know if Perry necessarily deserves a guy ranked as high as Till, even though it's a fun matchup. Just kind of playing the pessimist. How about Mike Perry and Bilal Muhammad? I think that makes a lot of sense. 2 guys willing to stand and trade, and both guys who are kind of ranked around the same area. I think it would be a fun fight for that one. So I'm just playing the pessimist here, but I do.
Bilal Muhammad needs an exciting fight. He's going to be stuck in those Fight Pass prelims if he keeps winning fights the way that he has been.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm just looking at it from a different angle. I mean, I would not argue to watch Till and Perry, but I just think with Till, you have to be careful. I think you do have someone who's relatively young, who has a good backing, who's, you know, got a lot of legal trouble and everything else. They got to build him back up again. You don't give him Mike Perry if you're trying to build him back up.
I think I'm just super impressed here, guys, with everyone tuned in and likely listening later on. What you guys are seeing is the evolution of James Lynch here, who is intelligent enough to put on the promoter hat for a second. Right? Sometimes when you break things down as an analyst, you can't just look at it from one perspective, be it the fighter or whatever. You have to look at it from a business perspective as well. You put James's hat on as a promoter, that makes perfect sense with Darren Till. You got a guy that does move the needle. We can go back to the Greg Hardy conversation. Greg Hardy moves the needle more than you know, who we'll talk about next, perhaps Glover Teixeira. Like it's a guy that, you know, a lot of us will sit inside the MMA bubble and not realize outside of the MMA bubble, people are tuning into a UFC event because, oh, NFL's Greg Hardy is competing, right? And then from a perspective from, you know, you got a guy like Darren Till who's big in the European market. Maybe you do have to protect him. You put some money in him. You're investing in him. Maybe Mike Perry is not the correct fight, despite us thinking, you know what, it'd be a great marketable fight. What are you losing in this perspective should Darren Till lose? So good call, James.
We're going to talk about Glover Teixeira and Carla Esparza next. Glover Teixeira overcame some adversity, beat a prospect emerging in the top 50 or near the top 15 in Ian Cutelaba. And like I mentioned, Ian Cutelaba did not look bad at times in this fight. Then you had Carla Esparza defeat Verna Jandiroba, who was a highly touted prospect, but took the fight on short notice. I don't think that she was hurt by this, but Carla Esparza probably needed to earn that victory. Glover Teixeira keeps himself very relevant with this win. Even though Cutelaba is outside of the top 15, I thought that Glover, his experience was so crucial here and ended up taking home the victory. Any thoughts on these two, James?
Yeah, I thought with Glover especially, you know, that's why I picked him in this fight. I felt the experience was going to be too much. He can still take a punch at his age. It's amazing, you know, for a guy his age that he's still able to, you know, persevere and get these wins. And I think experience was what this came down to. You know, Cutelaba had a nice run, but I mean, when you're facing a guy like Glover, in my opinion, he's still at the top, still close to the top, I should say. You're going to run into some trouble. And then as far as Esparza, yeah, good for her. I mean, you know, I counted her out in this fight. I think a lot of other people did too. She was the betting underdog. You know, that wrestling is good. I still think there's a ceiling on her at this point. I think she's still a wrestler. This is a good win for her, but I don't know. I still think we saw, you know, when she tries to get those fights that are in the contender spot, like a Tatiana Suarez, she's still not there yet. And I think, you know, this is a good win for her, but I don't know what her ceiling is. Not to discredit the win. The win was good, but I still don't think she's elite at this point.
Joe, your thoughts on these two?
Well, I mean, these are part of my weekend full of I told you so's. Carla Esparza, I thought for sure, just based on the matchup, and even though her opponent was a prospect, I thought she was going to win this fight. I don't think she's as bad as what her record states, especially with her last few fights, considering the controversy around one of the decisions, which I believe she should have won. So I still think she has the skills. I do get that. I do understand James's theory about her ceiling because she's still a wrestler. but her timing is fantastic. She's able to time it, whether it's in the first, second, or third round, when to get that takedown. If she can just sit down on those punches and really tee off and throw a bit more kicks, she would improve herself at 115 pounds. But it remains to be seen. And Glover, I can't count Glover out just yet. The only thing that Glover that I think that could beat the style to beat Glover, in my opinion, other than John Jones, obviously, is the speed factor. If you can outspeed and outpoint Glover Teixeira, you're going to catch him. And if you can catch him, you'll knock him out. You can take a punch. Yeah. I don't know if you're going to submit him. The guy's got some sick jiu-jitsu. Don't kid yourself. And above all, he's got dad strength. People don't understand what dad strength is. This guy is a manual labor specialist. This guy will pick up a bunch of logs and hay and whatever it takes to build a backyard or a deck or whatever, right? This guy's strong. He's as strong as an ox, and the experience is huge. His timing is smart, and he flat out said it, even in his pre-fight interviews and in his post-fight interviews. This guy's going to come at me with heat in the first round. All I have to do is get him into the second or third, and I will take over. I'll take what he has to give me in the first 5 to 7 minutes, and then I'll take over. Lo and behold, he gets him in the second round, 3 minutes, 37 seconds in, he gets a submission. So he did exactly what he was going to say. So kudos to Glover.
We saw some varying degrees of success and failure by some veterans. Takashi Sato defeated Ben Saunders. Might be it for Ben Saunders. That was a nice finish by Sato. Jim Miller, the other end of things, submitted Jason Gonzalez via rear naked choke, as will happen when you face Jim Miller sometimes. His family was there to see it. And then Andrei Arlovsky probably earned a win over Augusto Sakai, but the fight sucked so bad. It was a split decision that went to Sakai. Joe, what is left for any of these guys? Jim Miller said he wanted to go on a Cinderella man run, but admitted it was about his time. Ben Saunders, I'm beyond giving him the Jim Miller, Diego Sanchez, Joe Lozon chance in any fight. I don't see that anymore. And Andrei Arlovsky does not win fights, and beyond that, he doesn't have good performances even when he does win fights. I think his last good performance was in 15. What do you think is the future for these three?
Well, Ben Saunders, during last week's show, I mentioned how he's sort of that gatekeeper at welterweight, and Sato was going to be tested. If you can't beat Ben Saunders, you really shouldn't be in the UFC. Well, he beat Ben Saunders in the second round there. So Sato moves on. Ben Saunders, I mean, he's again, it seems like the theme of this show is the twilight, a bunch of guys in the twilight of their career. So he's got to go, in my opinion, eventually. He's just not there anymore at 170 pounds. Arlovsky.
Sorry to interrupt, but it's a real bad situation when you become the gatekeeper of who should be in the UFC as opposed to should they be in the top 15 or the top 10, because, man, is that a low bar these days.
Yeah, especially in a division that is that stacked. When you're looking at lightweight and welterweight, if I'm considering you the gatekeeper, it's not that good. And nothing personal against Ben Saunders. Don't get me wrong. It's just where he is in his career right now, right? I mean, I thought it was beautiful the way he was getting the clinch and the typical knees that he was throwing up the middle. I mean, it looks beautiful, but it's hard for him because the minute he gets tagged, the experience and the MMA miles that he's had on his body, his body starts shutting down. So Arlovsky's not getting destroyed, though. As much as he's not having exciting fights, he's not getting dropped and knocked out. So there's still a bit left in his tank. I'd like to see a bit more. In terms of Jim Miller and his Cinderella run, could be a beautiful story for 2019. I'd like to see it. I mean, like you said, we don't know how much he has left, but after what we saw with Diego Sanchez in his last fight, bring it on, Jim Miller. I'd like to see him continue to move up those ranks if he can.
James, your thoughts on this or any other fights that were on this show? Gilbert Burns earned a win that he should have won. Angela Hill beat Jody Escobar. Escobar might be hitting the brick. She's 0-3 in the UFC. Diego Lima defeated Court McGee. Most people, I think, would probably be out of a gig, but Court McGee probably will hang around. And then Roosevelt Roberts defeated Thomas Gifford as well.
Yeah. As far as Sato, I mean, this is a good scenario for him to get the finish in this one. Although he overcame a bit of adversity in the first. I thought Saunders looked good in the early going, but Sato just the younger guy. Arlovsky got robbed, but I'm sure Brendan Schaub's smiling somewhere with his fight in Vancouver, because that was a robbery itself. I was there live. Actually, Joe, you were there too. I remember seeing you there. Gilbert Burns, I mean, what is with this guy having to fight short notice opponents? Remember, he fought Dan Moret as well, like last year, and now he's fighting Mike Davis, another like local guy. So Burns has got to get a test here. I know he lost to Dan Hooker, and I know he just beat Olivier. He's got to find someone in the middle there as far as the next opponent. I think Alex Hernandez makes a bit of sense there as far as the next opponent. Jim Miller, it's great to see him go on this run, but I mean, I don't think Jason Gonzalez or Alex White will be in the UFC later this year. It would be nice to see him get a win over someone a little bit more established. But like we mentioned, last week, look at this killer's row of guys he's had to fight, like Poirier, Pettis, Hooker, Oliveira. Like, he's had a rough go. So, if he can still beat the guys he's supposed to, I guess that's good news. Angela Hill gets the win. Talk about, risk and reward. She had a short notice. She just lost to Randa Marcos on the Nashville card, takes us on short notice and gets the win. So good for her. And good for Diego Lima. I mean, here's a guy that, I swear, I mean, even in Titan FC, Joe, you know this, when Jason Jackson knocked him out, I mean, I thought this guy's career was done. And, he goes on the Ultimate Fighter. He ends up getting a win here, and then he fights Chad Laprise last year in a fight that I thought he was going to lose. He knocks out Chad Laprise, and now he beats Court McGee, so good for him. One of the nicest guys in the sport.
We also have 2 or 3 events over the next week. Bellator MMA Europe 2. There's Brent Primus.
Hold on.
Whoa. What?
Corey Sandhagen, John Lineker.
Holy crap.
Yeah.
I can't believe I missed that one. You're right. Corey Sandhagen. This was a good fight, too. A contrast of style, Sandhagen. Wow, the size difference between these two was ridiculous. And as I've mentioned on previous shows, it ain't easy to beat John Lineker. You almost have to do EPO to beat John Lineker. I don't think Sandhagen's going to pop for EPO anytime soon. This is much like the Hermansson fight. I consider this life-changing for Corey Sandhagen, Joe.
Did you gentlemen happen to mosey on over? It's down now, and I don't know why, but if you mosey on over to MMADecisions.com and take a look at the judges' scorecards for this fight, one ass clown of a judge, let me rephrase that, or let me say it again, one ass clown of a judge gave the 3rd round to Corey Sandhagen, which gave Corey Sandhagen this fight.
Yeah, it was a very...
This is the same round that Corey Sandhagen was winning on points, and then almost got submitted. Was fighting for his to not get submitted. That is a round that goes to John Lineker. Take nothing away from Corey Sandhagen, who had a fantastic performance. I loved his striking. His jab was beautiful, but scoring this fight here came down to the 3rd round. 2 of the judges gave it to John Lineker based on the facts of what happened in the fight. And one ass clown gave it to Corey Sandhagen. I have no idea how Sandhagen wins that 3rd round. No idea.
James?
Yeah, I mean, this fight reminded me, like, as far as, physicality, kind of a little bit of Brandon Thatch and Benson Henderson a couple of years ago, where, Thatch was much bigger and Henderson, the lightweight moving up, actually was able to win. But in this case, Sandhagen, the bigger guy, ends up winning this one. This is a really close fight. I really enjoyed this fight. People are like, I can't understand why they're booing. Well, I think people forget Lineker trains in Florida. I think people wanted him to win, and Sandhagen sort of, spoiled the party. So I understand that. But it was a great fight. Huge win for Corey Sandhagen. I think him getting a full camp for this fight really helped, because if you remember, their first scheduled fight was on short notice. So that was good. And I mean, he just looks to be a really good asset in that division. I think the next fight for him, people might think it's a bit too much of a jump up, but how about him and Rafael Assunção? Assunção needs to get back on the winning track. Sandhagen, how high is his ceiling? We'll see. I talked about it on the preview show. I thought Lineker was going to completely run through him, and he didn't. So props to Sandhagen. He's definitely getting better every fight. And for Lineker, I think he's just got to fight more and just try and go back to the drawing board, because he's relatively young as well. I think he's 28. So he just needs to, fine tune some things and, get back there. But he was very much in this fight. I think this fight could have gone either way, to be honest.
Now we'll talk Bellator MMA Europe 2. Kind of. Brent Primus, Tim Wilde, Pedro Carvalho, Derek Campos. You have Fabian Edwards, undefeated fighter, against somebody he should run through, an 11-9, Falco Neto Lopez. On the prelims, James Mulheron, Jim Wallhead's on there. Really not a lot of note. Joe, is this anywhere remotely close to your radar?
No. There's 600 fights on this card, I think. I mean, it's just nonstop. I get it, but I don't know. I think James will agree with this. I think you will too, Sean. Bellator really has to reevaluate this business plan that they have here. This is not making much sense to me. A 4-fight main card, cool, but they've got to do more in promoting their athletes. I'm sure they're trying, but
18 fights in total.
18 fights.
Imagine being the person who shows up for the first one.
Oh my God. You got to be there at 9 a.m.
They do the post-lim gimmick too. And I'm like, I don't know. Maybe it's lost on me. I think that is such a like an early 2000s, mid 2000s like type of thing to do. Just don't book that many fights. And I know that they're like, oh, well, maybe it'll help fill up the arena if we book locals and all that. Book better fighters. That might do it. James, any thoughts on this show? Brent Primus is going to win. Carvalho versus Campos might be good. Whatever.
Yeah, and we should mention Raymond Daniels is fighting in MMA.
Yeah.
He was in Glory, and obviously a very, very well-known kickboxing guy. But he's 38, and he's he hasn't fought in MMA since 2008 in Strikeforce. So it's been quite a while.
38 now.
Yeah, he's 38.
Wow.
And I don't know if they're still dating. He was dating Colby Northcutt, Sage Northcutt's sister.
Wow.
So good for him. Anyways, no. What this is what we see every once in a while. Bellator will sandwich a card in between like a big event and their next event, and it's like a Bama show or a Cage Warrior show, and they'll just slap the Bellator logo on there and add a couple fighters in there. That's basically what this is. I mean, Tim Wild, talk about not being wild about this main event. I mean, Brent Primus, Primus needs a bounce back, but he's not like a headliner. I mean, he's a former champion, but like, I don't think there's much interest. Yeah, I mean, there isn't much interest in this. I know Fabian Edwards is on this card too. He's Leon Edwards' brother. He's quite interesting. Brian Moore, who fought in the UFC, SBG guy, making the drop to bantamweight. He really needs a win, so that's kind of interesting. Sal Rogers is on this as well. He was on the Ultimate Fighter. I had some visa issues. The UFC didn't pick him up, so now he's in Bellator. So that's a little bit interesting. But yeah, I'm not going out of my. I mean, this is if there was ever a PVR or whatever. I don't even know if this is live. This is definitely a Sunday afternoon. I'll zoom through the fights, the catch the highlights type Bellator show, but that they only have themselves to blame. They can't be doing these cards that are so meaningless and they don't do any promotion for them. Like the only reason I knew Brent Primus was on this card was because his management reached out to me about an interview and I did the interview, but like I completely forgot this card was this weekend.
This is not even a PVR DVR. This is a watch the highlights on YouTube.
On YouTube, yeah.
On YouTube, which they don't send to us anymore because I wouldn't do a deal with DAZN. So there you go.
Ooh, a little slap in the face.
You're out of the DAZN.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, they reached out and they were like, oh, hey, maybe we can do some sort of ad deal. And they hit me with like a coupon gimmick. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. I'm not making the ad dependent on how much I sell your service. Like, that's not how we're rocking that. And then mysteriously after that, we don't get the highlights anymore, and I'm told, well, DAZN limits who we can send it to, and I'm like, oh, gee, I wonder what happened there. On the other end of things, I think PFL has a pretty damn good show, all things considered, next week. On the prelims, you have, I don't know how to pronounce his name, David Machad. There you go.
Yeah.
Nice name over there. Larissa Pacheco, UFC veteran, who a lot of people thought would be something he wasn't. But the main card, there's a lot I'm excited about. Joe or James, I know you're familiar with Chris Curtis. He's a local here who has since moved. He's taking on Lewis Taylor. This is a big, big fight for Chris Taylor. You know as well as I do, he's nonstop on social media. Why am I not in the UFC and this guy's in the UFC? He's getting maybe a better chance here, considering the fact that he retired like a year ago. If he walks away with $1 million, that could ease the pain a little bit.
I agree. Best case scenario for Chris Curtis, gets to fight on ESPN. This is better than being in the UFC. And here's the thing too. I mean, I think it's a better scenario for him. If he was in the UFC, he'd probably be on the prelims. He's on ESPN with PFL in the main event. It doesn't get any better than that. And actually, both these guys got snubbed by the UFC. If you remember, I got to look this up. I forget which fight it was, but he was Lewis Taylor was supposed to fight Uriah Hall ages ago, and he couldn't. I think he got injured or something. Oh yeah, here's what happened. 2015. So UFC Fight Night 59, Lewis Taylor was supposed to fight Uriah Hall on short notice. He got a back injury. UFC never kept him around. And that's when he went to World Series of Fighting. So, and you look at the career he's had. I mean, this is a guy who's 39 years old, and he won $1 million last year in the middleweight tournament, making the drop to welterweight for this fight. Very interesting matchup. Two really good guys. And you mentioned Chris Curtis. I actually spoke to him. He is actually in Las Vegas right now training out there. So he switched camps up. He's actually using the PI. I kind of joked at him. I was like, is this your way of getting back at the UFC, is using that guest pass at the PI? And he like sort of laughed about that. But no, good for him. I think this is such a good fight and a UFC level fight, in my opinion. I mean, if people want to disagree with me, that's fine. But this is a very, very good fight for PFL to kick things off.
Ray Cooper, who's been a standout for PFL against Zain Kamaka. You have John Howard against Magomed Karamov.
Yeah.
Wow. But the two fights I'm particularly interested in, Kayla Harrison in action against Svetlana Katova, a 2-0 fighter, but it's the Kayla Harrison show. That's what a lot of people tune in because of Kayla Harrison. And Joe, Sarah Kaufman taking on a woman who has 5 pro fights. That could be tragic.
Unless Morgan Freer comes up with a lot of speed and starts peppering Sarah Kaufman, I don't like her chances, to be honest with you. I think Sarah Kaufman walks away with this one here. I'm happy with Ray Cooper the third as well. He's a good guy. But I think I do agree with you. First of all, James, Lewis Taylor versus Chris Curtis. I'm sort of 50-50 on it being an actual UFC caliber fight, because my mentality is, when I still think, I go back to 97, 96, when it was called the Super Bowl of MMA. But it is a quality fight. It's a solid main event. I'll give you that. But Sean, I think you're right. It's Kayla Harrison show. It's going to be a good scrap here. We'll see how her development continues and what her evolution looks like.
That show takes place, I think it's next week, but I figured we'd get the jump on it.
It's a day after. Yeah, it's a day. I think it's on the 9th, actually. So it's a day after our show, I think next week or whatever, unless my math's wrong here or something like that. Just one quick thing. This Ray Cooper fight, I got to mention, is very interesting. Joe, you know Zain Kamaka, he fought in Titan. Yep. They're cousins. And actually Ray Cooper cannot stand Zain Kamaka. There's this whole thing with his family. They're both from Hawaii. So Ray Cooper is apparently Zain Kamaka is the black sheep of the entire family. And so this is super personal. I've interviewed Ray Cooper a couple times. He was so pissed off at Zain Kamaka, and he's like, I asked for this fight. He's ruining my family's name, all this stuff. Tune into that fight. That fight's going to be awesome. Cause like I said, we've seen Ray Cooper is, for the most part, a pretty respectful, quiet guy. He was pissed off at Zain, and he's like, this guy's so unranked. He's overhyped because he trains with Max Holloway. He's like, I'm going to show this guy he's so unskilled, blah, blah, blah. It's going to be a really good fight.
We also have UFC Ottowa this weekend. I'm going to run down the prelim shows. There are a couple of fights which we can add some unique perspective on, though. Cole Smith, a +105. Mitch Gagnon, a -125. Kyle Nelson, a +185. Matt Sales, a -225. You have Nordine Taleb, a massive favorite at -340 against Kyle Pripolek, a +280. Andrew Sanchez, a -155. Marc-Andre Barrial, a +135. But Ayman Zahabi, -165 against Vince Morales, a +145. Obviously, the Zahabi name's going to jump off the page, and Joe is going to develop little heart eye emojis. But your thoughts on what I've run down there, Joe?
If Ayman can start generating a bit more power, he's got it. But when you're in the UFC, you got to generate more. He can start finishing guys at ease. His striking precision and his striking in general is absolutely fantastic. He's just got to be able to launch it. Mitch Gagnon, I haven't talked to Mitch in a while. Remember, this is a guy that fought Hayden Barao before, right? So he's been around as well. But Mitch has gone through some serious injuries. He's back. He could quietly begin moving up the 135 pounds. He's just got to be able to be smart about this and see where it goes. And when you take a look, when you start talking about Nordine Taleb being a huge favorite, he's underrated still, in my opinion. He's got the experience, but he's also got a lot of MMA mileage. Don't forget that. He's been doing this for a long time. Maybe not many fights, but he's been doing this for a long time. I still think he emerges victorious in this fight.
We also have Arjan Buller at +105, Juan Adams a -125. Both these guys kind of have a pro wrestling connection. Buller was supposed to be walked to the cage about a year and a half ago by Jinder Mahal. That didn't end up happening. He's talked about Jinder Mahal straight up talking him out of being a pro wrestler. Juan Adams is a guy that you've spoken to a lot, James. He actually, I believe he had a tryout, right?
Yeah, with WWE, he did. Yeah.
And they're taking each other on. This is a very close fight. Juan Adams has a lot of just athleticism and very, very green, unrefined. Arjan Buller is refined in some areas, but hasn't been quite able to put it together in a dominating fashion. What do you think about this one, James?
I think it's a very interesting fight. You've got Adams, who's clearly physically talented. He's a very big guy. I think he showed a few holes in that debut against Chris De La Roca. I wasn't super impressed, but I mean, he's only got 5 fights. That's not a ton of experience, but that's heavyweight MMA in the state of 2019. We just saw Greg Hardy get his, I think, 5th fight as well. So I think it's one of those things where can Adams adapt quickly enough to take on a guy in Buller who has Olympic level wrestling? I mean, we forget that he fought or he competed as a wrestler for the Canadian Olympic team. So this guy is very well established. Not to mention the fact that for this camp and like a lot of his other camps, he's down in American Kickboxing Academy training with Daniel Cormier. That is a good thing to be able to train with one of the best in the world. This is a coin flip for me. I mean, when this was first announced, I was like, I know what they're doing here. They're trying to build up Juan because Arjun hasn't been super impressive. But again, if Arjun's able to out wrestle Juan Adams, I think there's some value here on him at plus 105. And just the fact that he has a lot more MMA experience, not a ton, but I mean, he's got 9 fights compared to Juan's 5. It should be interesting. The question is, can Juan Adams, can he outstrike Arjun Buller? And conversely, can Buller use his wrestling to take him out there? So I think this is a bit of a coin flip. If I have to pick, I'll go Adams, but I think there is some value here on Arjun Buller just with his wrestling background.
I am real excited to see what you guys think of this line. Macy Chiasson, a minus 700. Sarah Moras, a plus 500. Now, I get it. Macy's the hot thing on the streets. That line is wild to me. Wild to me. James, what says you?
I think people saw that last fight with Macy Chiasson, completely dismantling Gina Mazzani. Like, we have to remember that we don't see like first round finishes with female fighters that often. Yeah. And what she did to Gina Mazzani, I know Gina's sort of on the fringe of being a UFC fighter. That was still very impressive. And you have Sarah Morris, who's had sort of an up and down career. She's had some good wins. She had that win over Ashley Evans Smith, but it's tough to say sort of where she fits in the equation. I think it's more people are impressed with Chiasson because like she was, people didn't pick her to win the show. She won the show at 45. She beat Pani Kianzad, a fighter who's a lot more experienced than her. I get the hype. I mean, this line is still crazy in my opinion, but yeah. I do see it. I do see Chiasson, winning this fight, but those odds are just insane to me. It's kind of like what we had with Roosevelt, Roberts, and Gifford last week. Like, Roberts clearly won that fight. There's no contestation about that, but Gifford had his moments. Gifford wasn't like a plus 500 in my opinion. To me, when you're that much of an underdog, you have to be like completely, it has to be like a, I don't know, like an Edson Barbosa and Dan Hooker type fight where there's just no competition whatsoever. One person gets completely flatlined. That to me is a huge favorite in a fight like this. I don't know if that fight goes like this. I think Sarah will have her moments, but I think Macy Chiasson will win this fight.
I think Sarah could probably get underneath the hips of Macy pretty well. And Sarah is usually pretty heavy on top. I look at experience an awful lot. And 3 years ago, it's not like Chiasson can't be finished. She was finished in an amateur fight by a woman who never even turned pro. An excellent amateur fighter at that, Anna Dempster. But 3 years ago, Sarah Morris was in the UFC and had been for a while and has been fighting a very long time. Do I think that Chiasson is good? Do I think she'll win? Probably. But she's not unbeatable. But it is very, very, very hard to finish Sarah Morris as we've seen in the past. I think Juliana Pena did it on Tough. And I think that's it. I think that was the only time that she's ever been finished, pro or amateur, if I could be wrong. But yep, Joe, any thoughts on this one?
My thoughts are pretty basic. I mean, I think Macy is going to win this fight, not easily. But I'll say this, if towards the end of this show, if Sarah Moras is not in one of your I got 5s on it, I might as well just resign.
Yeah.
Like, there's no point in me even being part of Fightful anymore. Like, I mean, plus 500? What are you, insane? Jumping on that.
We have Sergey Spivak, a plus 140, Walt Harris, a minus 160, Brad Katona, plus 135, Mirab Davashvili, a minus 155. I think that could be a good fight or it could be a really bad fight. Then we have Cub Swanson, plus 150 against Shane Burgos, minus 170. Any thoughts on these, James, as we head into the top fights?
Yeah, I think the lines are wrong on both of these. I think Katona should be the favorite against Davashvili. What has Davashvili's done in the UFC, really, other than he probably should have beat Ricky Simone, because I don't know if he was necessarily, if the ref screwed that up or what happened there. But he's in close fights with guys that, like his last fight, for example, he got a close win over Terrion Ware, who's not in the UFC anymore. Like, to me, Katona already beat that type of fighter in the bantamweight division, and Matthew Lopez. I don't think Lopez will be in the UFC. I haven't heard anything about him being cut, but it's got to be pretty close here. Katona's good. He's getting better every day. He's fighting at the right weight class now at 135. Yeah, I mean, I think he's undefeated for a reason, and I think he hasn't really been battle tested, and I think he should be the favorite in this fight. So if you can get him at plus money, I think Bracketone is definitely worth it. Conversely, Cub Swanson, if you look at his experience compared to Shane Burgos, I mean, he's got 35 fights. He's fought the who's who. I realize he's taken some damage. He's getting older, this and that. But Shane Burgos only has 12 fights. He barely beat Kurt Hollabaugh. I mean, Hollabaugh had that fight in the bag, and then he had some bad fight IQ there, and he ended up getting submitted. I think Burgos is a great fighter, but this wasn't that long ago that Calvin Kattar finished Shane Burgos as well. I think there's definitely value here on Cub Swanson at plus money. I might even take a stab at him. Maybe I'll even pick him. Maybe I will pick him in this fight because, again, I think you have to look at who Cub's losing to. Frankie Edgar, he's losing to.
Well, look at his last 3 losses, right?
Yeah, exactly. Frankie Edgar, Brian Ortega, and Moicano. Burgos hasn't fought anyone to that level yet, really. And I think that as much as I love Burgos, great interview, great guy, definitely a rising prospect. I think Swanson should be the favorite here. So I think at plus money for both Swanson and Katona, that is definitely I got 5 for sure.
Joe, any thoughts on these?
Yeah, you take a look at Cub Swanson, man. Brian Ortega's Brian Ortega, man. Most guys are going to lose to him in this division. Frankie Edgar, he went the distance with Frankie Edgar. He lost a decision, right? And that was just 1 year ago. Then he ran into Renato Moicano. And this is just after I think he had his daughter, right, guys? Or he had his child?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, maybe mentally he was there, different motivation, but it's a different Cub Swanson. Again, he's got MMA mileage, but this dude's a monster no matter what. So just go back to his Duhoi Choi fight at UFC 206. I mean, yeah, his Artem Lobov fight. I mean, half the fights this guy has are just all performance of the night. So I don't think he's going to lose on Saturday night. I think he's going to emerge victorious. So we'll see what happens, though. But I'm definitely thinking he's going to have his hand raised at victory.
Fightful alumni Elias Theodorou is a plus 100 against Eric Brunson, minus 120. Elias is not the most exciting fighter in the world, but he has won 5 of his last 6, and they're matching him up against a guy who's lost 2 in a row, lost 4 of his last 6 because of how Elias fights. I'm shocked this is a co-main event. Brunson fights so exciting that sometimes it just doesn't make sense. And I think that's probably what the UFC is hoping for here. For better or for worse, Joe, I think they want him to press forward, cause some havoc, maybe draw something out of Elias, or put him down. This is a really good test for Elias in that regard. How do you think it goes?
I think it's a huge test for Elias, and I think he's got to be smart about it because Derek Brunson doesn't have a reverse gear, doesn't have a neutral gear. I think he'll come out and he'll attack Elias because he's not going to want to be under that pressure of fighting Elias here in Canada and sit there thinking these fans are going to be cheering this guy. I'm going to hurt him. I'm going to hurt him. I'm going to hurt him. If Elias can withstand. And he's good. Elias is smart in the first round. People always say he's a slow starter. Well, he uses that first round as a feeler process, right? Just to see exactly what his opponent's up to. And then you'll see Elias pick up the pace in rounds 2 and 3, which means we could see Elias technically lose this first round if he can withstand those first 5 minutes, then begin to take over in the second round. And, it's next to impossible for any one of us 3 to say he's going to get a finish. But if there's ever going to be a finish that's going to present itself, it's against a tired fighter. And if Brunson gasses himself out or expends too much energy where mistakes start to happen, Elias can take over.
James?
Yeah, and I think that's what happened to Eric Anders. I think he tried to go for broke in that second round against Elias, ran out of gas, and Elias ended up winning that fight. And that was a fight where I think people were picking Eric Anders. And this to me is a similar situation where you have a guy in Brunson who has knockout power, but if you can't put him away, then you're going to run into trouble. And Elias is great at game planning and using his cardio and going a little bit, going the distance or whatever. The interesting thing with Brunson for this fight is that he's training at Hard Knocks. So, getting some refined striking, technique with Henry Hooft and all those great fighters at Hard Knocks, getting to work with Robbie Lawler and everyone else. So I think that's going to help Brunson in this fight. The problem is Theodore is so tough to finish. He's never actually been finished in his career. And he's fought guys that have finishing power, like Thiago Santos, like Brad Tavares. So I think if Brunson doesn't finish this could be Elias's fight to take. This would be I got 5 on it, to be honest. And I would actually, the prop right now in Theodore by decision isn't much more, but it's plus 130. I think that's probably likely if Elias wins the fight. I don't see Elias finishing Derek Brunson, but because Elias's last finish, I think, was Roger Narvaez like ages ago. Yeah. So it's been a while, but I just think I think Elias has shown that he's very durable, and I think if Brunson can't put him away, he could end up taking it. Now, saying that, I think Brunson, if this stays on the feet, I think Brunson's a better striker, and he'll take home a win himself. But don't count out Elias in this fight. And to answer your question as to why this is a co-main event, I think it's come to the point, Joe, and you can probably speak more to this than I can, but let's go back to when the UFC first came to Canada. You had George St. Pierre. You had all these huge stars. I think right now, if you're looking at the roster, Elias is probably the biggest Canadian star they have right now. So that's why he's in this co-main event slot. And he has a big following on Twitter, and he has all these things outside his current fighting career. I think that's what they're banking on more than anything, is that he's just a guy that Canadians are like, oh yeah, I'll root for him. I think that's why he's in the spot.
Yeah, he's got the biggest following in the country, that's for sure. That's a live UFC competitor on the roster, so I think that's why he's in the co-main event. We can get into the UFC and how they drop the ball in Canada, but that's another story altogether.
Main event, Al Iaquinta, -130 favorite against Donald Cerrone at +110. Donald Cerrone, assuming the weight cut goes smoothly, I mean, he never misses weight in that regard, but you never know what it takes out of him. He's won 3 out of 4, and he's finishing people. Al Iaquinta, great performance against Kevin Lee. Also, I wonder what kind of Kevin Lee that was. That was not the Kevin Lee that so many expected. Other than that, he's not really had a great performance since 2017 because he didn't fight that much. But that win over Kevin Lee put him in a place in this division. Hanging with Khabib Nurmagomedov for 5 rounds put him at a place in this division. I'm going with Donald Cerrone. I think that Donald Cerrone can get himself out of most positions that he ends up in on the ground. However, as we've seen, Al Iaquinta will slug it out with you, and he will do some damage there. I think that Donald Cerrone has more ways to finish this fight than Al Iaquinta does, but I think the line is right where it should be, Joe. It's really close, and it's a hell of a fight. What do you think?
I think the line is exactly where it should be. I think you're absolutely right. My only concern for Donald Cowboy Cerrone would be the fact that you're cutting more weight, less water around your brain, a.k.a. easier to get knocked out, taking on Al Iaquinta, who'll be more than happy to brawl with him. So this is going to be a fantastic fight. I cannot see it whatsoever being a boring fight or what the hell am I watching type of fight. I think this one goes down, and this is going to be guns a blare, and just these guys are going to be going absolutely nuts. I don't know if I could actually make a prediction in this one here, because there's Cerrone just has that skill, boys, that at any one point in time he throws off that 3-4 punch combination, ends with a kick, someone goes nighty-night. So and Al Iaquinta is he's a real estate agent. I'm a mortgage broker. We're cool like that. I know Donald forever, known Al forever, right? So I'm just gonna let this one go, boys. I'm just looking forward to it going down.
James?
Yeah, I think this is Joe. I'm glad Joe brought up the weight cut, because I think that could play a role here. I thought it was going to happen in the last fight against Alex Hernandez. I thought Hernandez would catch him at one point, but I think the experience with Cowboy, and I think Hernandez got a little big brother there. I think maybe a little too, you're fighting your idol, one of your idols in Cowboy. I mean, Hernandez is from Texas and stuff. It was a big deal for him fighting him. But Al Iaquinta, to me, what he showed in his last fight, and I realized Kevin maybe wasn't himself, but that was very impressive. He went the distance with Khabib. I realized that was a short notice fight, but Al is getting big wins. He's getting big knockouts. I think Al, all he has to do if this stays standing is outpoint Cerrone. And to me, I think Al right now is the better fighter. I think we haven't learned enough at as far as Cerrone at lightweight. I mean, if you go look at Cerrone's record right now, his last big win at lightweight, you have to go all the way back to Benson Henderson, January 2015. Like, no offense to John McDessie and some of the other lightweights he's fought, but that's the biggest win he's had in the lightweight division since then. And Al's been beating, Kevin Lee and, Diego Sanchez. Has a split over Jorge Masvidal, which as well, I know that was a fight that could have gone either way, but still, that's still a good win on his resume. To me, I think that Iaquinta is just a better striker, and I don't see this hitting the mat. I think Iaquinta keeps it standing, and he potentially finishes Cerrone either in the 3rd round or he gets a decision here. But I like Al Iaquinta, and I think the line, like you said, is right where it needs to be. Cerrone, very dangerous on the ground, an accomplished striker himself. But I just think, I'll go with the younger guy and the guy who has a little bit more upside in the lightweight division.
Time to slap you guys with my I got 5 on it picks for UFC Ottowa. The easy one, Sarah Moras +500 against Macy Chiasson.
Keeping my job.
Hey, there you go. There you go. There are some interesting props here, like Moras wins inside the distance at +856. Moras wins by decision, a +750. Like, I definitely think she could win by decision. Not to the point to where I'll go with that, though. Sergey Spivak, a +140. Not a great line or anything, but it's a heavyweight fight, as we mentioned. And I'm always willing to take a flyer on that. Walt Harris, a -160. And another rather close line that I'm willing to take one on is the one that James mentioned. +135, Brad Katona Merabdivashvili is minus 155. We've seen Merab in some situations that he couldn't get himself out of, literally to the point to where he may have actually been out of them and still lost a fight. So Brad Katona is looking very, very good of lately. A bonus one, guys. I think there might be some value on Cub Swanson at plus 152 because of all the things that he's done. But that's my UFC Ottowa. I got 5 on it picks. Join our live coverage this weekend. James, what do you got going on?
I'll just mention a quick, I got 5 as well. Cole Smith, we didn't talk about him. I know we talked about the Gagnon fight. He's plus money right now, been a lot more active than Mitch Gagnon has. Gagnon hasn't fought since December of 2016 when he lost to Matthew Lopez. I think there's a chance that Cole Smith, the BFL champ, could go in there and take care of business at plus 105. But as far as what I got going on, my roof's being renovated. I hope you guys didn't hear it. I've been dealing with that this week. So I've got a few interviews, but kind of scaling back a little bit this week. Plus it's tax season. I don't know if you've got, Joe, I know I'm sure you're filing your taxes as well, but it's been a bit annoying. But yeah, so just, keeping busy, but a little bit of a lighter week work-wise for me.
Joe, yourself?
My taxes don't have to be filed till June. James, self-employed. My wife's are done. That's been submitted. Other than that, same old for me. No soccer for this guy for a week as our indoor permits have expired. And in Canada, Sean, up here, I shouldn't say Vancouver. In Toronto, just north of Toronto, our fields aren't ready. So we're not getting field stuff till next week. So a break for my boys, a break for me. And because I've got this cold, I don't have to yell and get these boys on their pylons and get those drills going. So same old for me.
Guys, thank you all so much. Until next time, we're out.